Hello, my name is Marcus Cotton, and I wrote and performed the short trip Biding My Time. Well, I first got inspiration for this story pretty much immediately after finishing Empire of Death. It kind of helped that on social media, because of Russell T Davies' reasoning in the episode, everyone was kind of making memes about it. Sutek's been clinging to the TARDIS since Pyramids of Mars. Well, what would have been his thoughts on this story? What was he doing during this story? And so on. And as people were kind of memeing and joking about it, I began to think, okay, but what if we took this seriously? And that's really where the premise for Biding My Time came from. As soon as I began conceiving the story and taking notes on it, I knew from the get-go it was going to be a short trip. In fact, comparing it to Big Finish, I specifically drew inspiration from the more performance monologue type short trips. Where it's an actor playing a character instead as opposed to just an audiobook. So, short trips like I Am the Master, or How to Win Planets and Influence Media, and How to Win Planets and Influence People, or Dead Media. So, because those are those performance monologues are some of my favorite short trips. So that's really, in terms of format, what Biding My Time is based on. Also, in part two, this idea came from an acting standpoint. I did conceive it kind of selfishly as a vanity project for myself to perform. I am really thankful for the memes because they kind of helped me focus and decide what stories I wanted to comment on. Like, I knew I was not going to go into the expanded universe. This would be a multi-part saga if I tried to do that, and I was not going to comment on every episode of the show. So I made a conscious decision that from Pyramids of Mars to The Legend of Ruby Sunday, because I wanted to stop at the reveal, what stories would Sutek comment on? What stories would he be personally invested in? And immediately what came to my mind were stories that affected the TARDIS itself, most notably, at least to my memory, the Doctor's wife, as well as stories where the Doctor faced other immortal beings. So, like, I make references to The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, The Curse of Fenric, Can You Hear Me, and, those kinds of stories. Conceptually, too, one of my big challenges, one of my big hurdles, I feel, was that, since Russell T Davies introduced this idea of the Pantheon of Chaos, who was going to be in the Pantheon and who wasn't? Because I feel like now that this idea exists, Russell T Davies would just take the lazy way out and say, oh, they're all part of the Pantheon. I wanted to be a little bit more creative than that. I wanted to say, okay, these are members of the Pantheon, and these are not. So, like, obviously the ones that were listed in Harriet's monologue in The Legend of Ruby Sunday, the Toymaker, the Mara, they're part of the Pantheon. And then there are some that I kind of inferred are, even though we don't really know at this point, like the gods of Ragnarok or Fenric. Admittedly, I do kind of minimally regret saying that the Animus from the Web Planet is one. But anyway, I also had to make a decision into say, okay, what immortals would not be part of the Pantheon? Like, I feel the Guardians would not. I mean, let's be honest, Sutek called them the Pantheon of Discord. I doubt he would make a benevolent god like the White Guardian. I said the Eternals were not, or Zelen and Rakaya, or the Beast from the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. Although my inclusion of that segment here was really just me being cheeky, it's kind of my idea of a joke. And I feel like it would be something I'd have to comment on just for the meta fact that in the Impossible Planet, the Satan Pit, the Beast is voiced by Gabriel Wolf. And that's all I really have to say about the conception and writing of this story. Well, personally, I think I'm most proud of the more gruesome segments I come up with, like the idea that the way Sutek created his pantheon was he tore pieces off of himself and threw them out into the vortex, or he, in the resolution of the Giggle, when the Doctor duplicated the TARDIS, there was fan theories that it also created a second Sutek. I'm personally most proud of saying, oh yeah, there was, but correcting it by just having Sutek eat himself. It's such a gruesome segment, at least it was in writing it, and I really hope our fantastic editors can make it as gruesome as it played out in my head. I am doing this behind the scenes right after I've just finished recording the story. But I guess that's really all I have to say about writing the story, so I will move on to performance. And there's not really a lot to say. Just, I had it in my head how this was gonna sound, and then when I actually went to perform it, it ultimately ended up playing very differently. Because doing Sutek ended up being kind of different from how I've done basically every other pre-existing character I've done. And I'm going to compare myself a lot to Big Finish in this regard. Like, if you've ever heard any of the early adventures, when William Russell or Peter Purvis played the first Doctor, or Fraser Hines played the second Doctor, or even how Tim Treloar does the third Doctor, they always emphasize that they are not doing impressions. They are trying to do the performance of the character. Or, to kind of simplify, they do the performance first, and then the impression comes second. For, again, the pre-existing characters I've done in fan audios and stuff, like the second Doctor, or the War Master, or that one time I did the Valyard, for me, it was the opposite. It was always impression first, and then let the performance come second. But as I started recording this, I realized I could not do that with Sutek, just because Gabriel Wolf has such a unique voice. And when I tried to emulate it, at least to my ear, it didn't sound right. So, again, doing this right after I record, I really hope that the editor can, with modulation, because Sutek's voice is slightly modified, can kind of cover up the fact I don't sound anything like Gabriel Wolf. But yeah, so this was my first time doing that approach, performance first, impression second. Also, I found that this was the same case. Doing Sutek was the same case as how I do the Valyard. I haven't done the Valyard for Spectral Horizons. It was a different production. Because Gabriel Wolf's voice has changed over time. So it's not just that I'm emulating this actor, it's when am I emulating him? Because how he sounds in Pyramids of Mars, is very different from how he sounds in The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death. And even a little bit how he sounds in Triumph of Sutek, just because age has changed his voice so much. So as far on the impression side of things, it was also a case of, okay, when am I doing Gabriel Wolf? Not just how am I doing Gabriel Wolf, but at which point in his life am I doing it? Ultimately, I did try to lean more towards sort of a middle ground around the time he did Triumph of Sutek. But again, because I ended up more focusing on the performance than the impression, I really just hope that comes out. And I hope you enjoyed this story and my take, sort of my justification on how kind of these events played out leading up to this moment. And thank you.